Cleopatra, the last pharaoh. The torches burned low inside the royal mausoleum in Alexandria. Outside, Roman soldiers moved through the streets like a rising tide, their armor shining red beneath the Egyptian sun. Inside, the Queen of Egypt sat beside a basket of figs and listened for footsteps that would decide the fate of her world. It was August, 30 BC. The greatest kingdom of the ancient Mediterranean had already fallen. Her fleet had scattered. Her armies had surrendered. The man she loved, Mark Antony, lay dead after a failed suicide attempt, bleeding in her arms before the end finally came. And now Octavian, the future Augustus Caesar, waited outside the city. For centuries, enemies had called Cleopatra dangerous, seductive, corrupt. Roman writers later claimed she destroyed powerful men with beauty alone. Yet beauty was almost useless in that room. Rome had won because Rome possessed something far more powerful than charm. Time. Cleopatra understood that before anyone else did. And as she stared at the silent basket beside her, one question remained. Would the last pharaoh of Egypt die as a prisoner, or as a queen? History remembered Cleopatra as a temptress. A woman wrapped in gold, whispering into the ears of powerful Roman men. Paintings turned her into a symbol of seduction long before most people learned anything about her kingdom, her politics, or her mind. But that version of Cleopatra was dangerously incomplete. She was not Egyptian by blood. She spoke more languages than almost any ruler of her age. And for more than 20 years, she fought a political battle so difficult that most kings would have failed within months. Even more surprising, Cleopatra did not try to destroy Rome. She tried to save Egypt from becoming part of it. This story was not truly about romance. It was about survival. It was about a woman born into a collapsing dynasty who faced the largest empire in the Mediterranean and nearly preserved her world through intelligence alone. It was also about propaganda, because much of what later generations believed about Cleopatra came from the victors who buried her. So who was she really? A reckless queen blinded by ambition? A brilliant strategist trapped in an impossible age? Or the final defender of a civilization already standing at the edge of extinction? Long before Cleopatra entered history, Egypt had already become an old kingdom living in a younger world. The pyramids were ancient even to her. When Cleopatra was born around 69 BC, more time had passed since the construction of the Great Pyramid than has passed between Cleopatra and the modern world today. Egypt carried the weight of thousands of years, yet its power had faded like paint beneath the desert sun. The true masters of the Mediterranean were now the Romans. Rome did not yet call itself an empire, but its armies controlled enormous territories. Roman generals competed for glory with terrifying ambition. Wealth flowed into the Republic from conquered lands, while political violence poisoned the streets of Rome itself. Elections were bought. Rivals were murdered. Civil war hovered constantly over the Republic like a gathering storm. Egypt survived because it remained useful. The Nile still produced immense wealth. Grain from Egypt fed huge populations across the Mediterranean. Gold, papyrus, glass, and trade routes passed through Alexandria, one of the richest cities on earth. Whoever controlled Egypt possessed a treasure house. Yet the kingdom itself stood on fragile foundations. Cleopatra belonged to the Ptolemaic dynasty, descendants of one of Alexander the Great's generals. Although they ruled Egypt for nearly 3 centuries, they remained culturally Greek. Many never even learned the Egyptian language. Cleopatra was different. Ancient writers claimed she spoke at least 9 languages. She addressed foreign ambassadors without translators. She studied philosophy, mathematics, diplomacy, and medicine. More importantly, she understood performance. In a world ruled by symbols, she presented herself not merely as a queen, but as the living goddess Isis. And still, from childhood, danger surrounded her. The Ptolemaic court was infamous for betrayal. Brothers married sisters. Family members poisoned one another for the throne. Assassination was not scandalous there. It was almost tradition. Then came the sharpest truth of all: Cleopatra inherited a kingdom that Rome had already decided to consume. Her struggle was never simply to rule Egypt. It was to delay the future itself. At 18 years old, Cleopatra became co-ruler with her younger brother, Ptolemy XIII. Officially, they ruled together. In reality, powerful court advisors attempted to control the boy king and remove Cleopatra entirely. Soon, her face disappeared from official documents. Her allies vanished from court. Eventually, she fled Alexandria and gathered an army in the eastern desert. Most rulers would have surrendered then. Cleopatra moved toward crisis instead. In 48 BC, Julius Caesar arrived in Egypt while chasing his rival Pompey during Rome's civil war. Pompey had already been murdered by Egyptian officials hoping to impress Caesar. Instead, the killing disgusted him. Cleopatra saw opportunity immediately. Ancient sources later described the famous scene in almost theatrical terms. She entered the palace secretly at night, hidden either inside a carpet or a sack of bedding, then emerged before Caesar himself. The story survived because it sounded romantic. Yet romance was only the surface. What truly mattered was courage. One mistake would have meant execution. Caesar was 52. Cleopatra was around 21. He had conquered Gaul and defeated massive armies. She arrived not with soldiers, but with intelligence, charisma, and absolute political clarity. Egypt needed Rome's strongest man. Caesar needed Egypt's wealth. Their alliance reshaped the Mediterranean. After fierce fighting in Alexandria, Caesar defeated Cleopatra's rivals and restored her to the throne. Yet even victory carried blood. Parts of the Great Library of Alexandria may have burned during the conflict. The streets filled with corpses. Her younger brother drowned in the Nile while fleeing battle. Power had returned to Cleopatra. But power in her world always demanded payment. And what kind of queen tied her fate to the most dangerous politician alive? Cleopatra later traveled to Rome itself. There she lived openly as Caesar's ally and bore him a son called Caesarion. Roman conservatives hated her presence. To them, she represented monarchy, foreign influence, and Eastern luxury, everything many Romans feared. Then, in 44 BC, Caesar was assassinated. The future shattered overnight. For a moment, Cleopatra stood completely alone. But history offered her one final chance. Mark Antony entered her life several years later, though not as the foolish lover later Roman propaganda described. Antony was one of Rome's most capable commanders. He understood war, loyalty, and spectacle. Cleopatra understood all three as well. Their first famous meeting at Tarsus became legendary. Cleopatra sailed up the river on a magnificent barge with purple sails and silver oars while servants dressed as mythological figures surrounded her. Ancient writers described the scene with amazement. Yet again, the performance concealed calculation. She needed Antony to see Egypt not as a weak client kingdom, but as a civilization equal to Rome itself. It worked. Together, Antony and Cleopatra formed both a political alliance and a personal bond that terrified their enemies. They had children together. They planned campaigns. They distributed eastern territories among their heirs in ceremonies that shocked Rome. Then came the turning point. In 31 BC, Antony and Cleopatra faced Octavian at the Battle of Actium. The naval battle unfolded off the western coast of Greece beneath smoke, fire, and screaming men trapped between fleets. At the height of the battle, Cleopatra's ship suddenly broke through the fighting and fled south. Antony followed her. Historians debated the decision for centuries. Was it panic? Strategy? Betrayal? Even now, no one knew with certainty. What remained undeniable was the consequence. Octavian gained total advantage. 1 year later, Roman forces invaded Egypt itself. And the world of the pharaohs began to die. For a brief moment, Cleopatra achieved something astonishing. She preserved Egyptian independence for more than 2 decades during the most violent expansion of Roman power. Against generals, civil wars, assassinations, and invasions, she kept her kingdom alive through diplomacy alone. No ruler of her position should have survived that long. Alexandria flourished under her rule. Trade expanded across the eastern Mediterranean. Temples rose. Scholarship continued. Egypt remained wealthy while Rome tore itself apart through civil war. Yet greatness carried terrible cost. Cleopatra's family disappeared one by one into death and political necessity. Her alliances forced her into Roman conflicts she could never fully control. Increasingly, survival required compromise. To protect Egypt, she tied herself to powerful Roman men whose ambitions eventually consumed them all. Then came the hinge upon which everything turned, Actium. After that defeat, the balance of power changed permanently. Octavian advanced slowly toward Alexandria while Antony fell into despair. Ancient writers described him wandering in confusion, drinking heavily, struggling against the collapse of the future he once imagined. Cleopatra never stopped calculating. Even at the edge of disaster, she negotiated with Octavian, tested escape plans, and prepared treasure ships. Some accounts suggested she considered fleeing to India. Others claimed she experimented with poisons to discover the least painful death. The queen who had spent her life mastering survival was now studying how to die. When Octavian entered Alexandria in 30 BC, the end arrived quickly. Antony received false news that Cleopatra had died. In despair, he stabbed himself with a sword. The wound failed to kill him immediately. Bleeding heavily, he was carried to Cleopatra's mausoleum, where he died beside her. Days later, Octavian visited the defeated queen. Ancient historians described the meeting with fascination. Cleopatra reportedly dressed simply, without royal ceremony, and attempted one final negotiation for her children's future. Octavian listened carefully. He needed her alive for his Roman triumph parade. A captured queen would strengthen his victory. Cleopatra understood that humiliation awaited her. For centuries, rumors surrounded her death. The most famous story claimed an asp, an Egyptian cobra, delivered hidden venom through a basket of figs. Other historians argued poison entered through a hollow comb or concealed pin. The exact method mattered less than the decision itself. Cleopatra chose the final act of her story. She died before Octavian could display her in chains through Rome's streets. And with her death, something ancient vanished from history. Egypt ceased to exist as an independent kingdom. After nearly 3,000 years of pharaohs, dynasties, temples, and monuments, the civilization of ancient Egypt became a Roman province. The ending had been waiting since the beginning. Cleopatra did not lose because she lacked intelligence. She lost because she stood at the exact moment when small kingdoms could no longer resist expanding empires. She fought history itself, and delayed it longer than anyone expected. Without Cleopatra, the ancient world might look strangely different. She helped shape the final transformation of Rome from republic to empire. Her alliance with Antony forced Octavian to define himself as the defender of Roman tradition. In defeating her, he gained the authority that eventually allowed him to become Augustus, Rome's first emperor. Her image survived even when her kingdom did not. For centuries, poets, painters, and historians transformed Cleopatra into fantasy. Roman writers often portrayed her as a manipulative seductress because it made Rome's civil wars easier to explain. It was more comforting to blame one foreign queen than admit Roman ambition nearly destroyed Rome itself. Yet history judged her unfairly in another way as well. Cleopatra was one of the ancient world's most educated rulers. She governed a wealthy state during extraordinary political chaos. She mastered diplomacy in multiple languages. And she faced the strongest military power of her age without surrendering her throne until the very end. That was rare. The last pharaoh did not preserve Egypt forever. No ruler could have done that. But for one generation, she forced Rome itself to struggle for victory. And even now, more than 2,000 years later, the world still remembered her name. Perhaps that was its own kind of triumph. So what truly destroyed Cleopatra? Was it personal ambition? Was it love? Or was Egypt already doomed long before she was born, with Cleopatra merely becoming the final witness to an ending no human being could stop? History still argued about that question. And perhaps that was why her story endured. Cleopatra was not simply the last queen of Egypt. She was the final moment when the ancient world still believed it could resist Rome. For more journeys into the lives that shaped civilization, subscribe and continue exploring the forgotten edges of history, where empires rose, legends formed, and human beings changed the world long before the modern age began.